What's up, everybody, and welcome back to an impromptu episode of the 107 MMA show. And today, what we're talking about is this evolving story on UFC 303. But really, it's not about UFC 303, it's about Conor McGregor. And we are still trying to figure out what exactly is going on. There's been a lot of updates, there's been a lot of ups and downs, there's been reports and rumors of injuries. There's been reports potentially of contract negotiations. I even heard somebody say that they think they're penalizing Conor because he's failing to meet his media obligations, which I don't think is true. I think there's too much writing on this that I don't think that would get in the way and be a hindrance. I think there's too much at stake for the future of the company and what this fight can do and what Conor McGregor's future, even if it's not super long and lengthy, but I think it's going to play a big part in the future of the business, the stock price and revenue streams, etc. So I think that we are in a position where we're starting to kind of understand what might be at play. Ariel did a segment on his show today on the MMA Hour, and we're going to start by listening to Ariel's take and his overall summary of what's been going on and what the status is of the main event of UFC 203, namely Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. So let's check that out now, and then I'm going to jump in and give you my thoughts on what I think is going on here.
There was some concern. There was some doubt. There were roadblocks. I came on this show on Wednesday and said optimism was high. There was great positivity, all those words that I used. It felt like we had...
I wanted to say something, by the way. When he did say this last time about optimism being high and they're very hopeful that the fight was going through, I thought that sounded a little bit funny too, because it seemed to me like he was relaying those words from the Conor McGregor camp. Like there is optimism, but without really saying that, I think they were thinking there is a chance that this fight can go down, but it didn't seem like there was a lot of confirmation, a lot of true information. It almost seemed like something that the McGregor camp wanted to push out into the public just to kind of keep fans going, keep fans excited about UFC 303, regardless of what may or may not happen, and push that narrative, not as though Ariel was being deceptive by any means. He's a journalist and he will operate with great integrity, but I think he was relaying, to me is what it sounded like, the message from the McGregor camp without a lot of substantive information. So let's go through and let's keep listening to what Ariel has to say for the rest of this.
Dodged a bullet. It felt like we had turned a corner. On Tuesday, I reported that the UFC was sending out feelers. They were reaching out to fighters and managers to see who could possibly be available to either replace the fight, meaning 2 new fighters, or step in and replace one of the fighters involved to fight on this card. Obviously, the fighter that we're talking about is Conor McGregor because, if not, why would why would Chandler be ready to go on a plane to Dublin? And so I said that it seemed like we were all good. And by Wednesday, no feelers were being thrown out. No one was talking about this really. It seemed as though all systems were a go.
There were other things that happened, by the way, in the interim, right? The UFC then put the pre-sale tickets back available online for purchase for the pay-per-view event. They released a new promo. I think it was on Friday. I remember when I was landing at the airport where I was headed to, I saw when I landed that the promo was up there. They had released a new promo, I think, even promoting the Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler fight. So a lot of signs that were like, okay, maybe we're moving in the right direction. We're still going to get to what I think is actually happening, or what one of 2 options that might potentially be going down here. But we see that things seem to be a go at this time. Then I'm going to let Ariel jump back in.
And more proof to that was Chandler doing the interview with The Pivot, speaking about everything that he had been through over the past week.
This interview, by the way, if you haven't seen it with The Pivot, I was going to play a clip here, but it's a pretty short clip that I wanted to show you. But basically, on that podcast, they asked Michael Chandler, all right, so what this fight is going to happen as planned. And he slips up and he says, yeah, let's hope. I mean, yes, it's happening. The fight is definitely happening. It's going down on June 29th. And if you look at his face, maybe I'll pull it up actually. If you look at his face when he does say that he thinks the fight is happening on June 29th, he does not look very confident at all. You don't have to be a body language expert to pick that up. He seemed like he didn't really know what was going on. And I get it, because the fight seems to be hinging not on what Chandler's planning to do, not whether he shows up, but whether or not McGregor shows up. And again, we're going to get into what we think is happening in a second. So let's keep playing.
The interview was done late last week. And also on the ABC card, the Fight Night card in Louisville on Saturday on the telecast, a ton of promos regarding UFC 303 and regarding that specific fight. T-Mobile is promoting it. UFC is promoting it. All systems seem to be a go. All right. Monday, nothing really out of sort. But yesterday morning, started to hear, as I continued to check in, because I know there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of doubt, a lot of concern about this because it's such a big fight. And because no one involved, in particular from the UFC side and from the McGregor camp, are speaking about this publicly. Chandler did the one interview and that was it. And I think that squashed some concern, but no one is coming out and really talking about this.
And by the way, nobody from the McGregor camp, nobody from the UFC has said a word. And that's a bad sign, I think, because they just probably don't have enough information to confidently say one way or the other. The other thing that people are saying is, and he's going to talk about this in a second, as feelers are going out again for replacement options, the general consensus is that the UFC will not make any sort of statement until they have a backup option. And that the only reason why they would is if they felt highly confident that the McGregor fight was going down and they could reassure fans, especially after all the travel arrangements have been made, all the purchases for tickets, et cetera, et cetera. So this really all goes to that direction of there are some major uncertainties. And again, we're going to talk in a second about what could be causing this type of concern, what could have caused him to miss the press conference, and just sort of get into some theories about what is really happening here.
I understand the concern. So I continue to check in and be a pest and be annoying. And I found out that via multiple sources that they are reaching out to people again. They are reaching out to managers. They are reaching out to fighters. And as I reported yesterday, as potential replacements, i.e. a new fight, as backups, as someone stepping in for McGregor, or as just insurance, as a, just in case we need to know if all these things are at play. One step further. Here we are, Wednesday, 1:13. The positivity that I talked about exactly 1 week ago today is nowhere to be found. I would say this fight is very much in limbo. I would say that it's hanging on, and I would say the UFC is working very, very hard right now to figure out a plan B. Now, the plan B could be someone stepping in to fight Chandler. The plan C could be a whole new fight. If you look at the roster, if you look at who's available, if you look at the champions who have just fought or who are scheduled to fight, there aren't a ton of options. There really aren't. And we could play this exercise because, trust me, I've played it a million times. But I'm just telling you where we stand right now, and I'm telling you the God's honest truth. And you want to know why it is the truth? Go back to Dustin Poirier versus Benoit Saint-Denis. Go back to when Dustin Poirier came out and said, I'm not fighting because I wasn't happy with my deal. And then we spoke about it a little bit. Dana White was very quick to go on his social media and say that we're all a bunch of bullshitters and this isn't true. And the fight was on. Behind the scenes, as this was all going down, they fixed it. They gave him what he wanted. This has been a story that we've talked about since Monday of last week, 10 days. That hasn't happened once. Does that not give you pause? Trust me, no one on planet Earth wants to see this fight more than me. I know everyone wants to see it just as much, but I am dying to see this fight. I want nothing more than to see this fight. I want to see Conor back healthy. I want to see Michael Chandler get his payday. I want to see that big fight.
So we're all on the same page, and I think Ariel is as well. We want to see this fight more than anything because, as we mentioned on the show on Monday, there's so many unanswered questions about Conor McGregor. Does he still have what it takes? I believe he does. Is he still training hard? I believe he is. And can he beat Michael Chandler? I believe he does and will beat him if he can make it to the ring or the cage. Now, let's talk a little bit more about what is potentially happening. So I would say, I've heard everything. Right. I've heard rumors that, again, we go back to Conor missing press obligations, and that's why the UFC is maybe pulling him from the fight. I think that's nonsense. That doesn't make any sense to me. There's too much on the line. We've heard these other reports that this is a ploy, that he missed the presser and he's just trying to drum up more media attention to get more excitement for the fight. I don't think that's the case either. I think that would be too bizarre, especially considering they sold so many tickets. People were so excited to go to that presser in Dublin. I just don't think this is a publicity stunt. I think that it may work out to generate more buzz for the fight, and that's a happy coincidence, but I don't think it's that either. So we come down to, I think, two possibilities. Now, one thing that was essentially mentioned by Ariel just now was this issue with Dustin Poirier versus Benoit Saint-Denis. And it was over a contract dispute, a contract negotiation, where Dustin came on and said that he came out somewhere and said that he didn't think the fight was happening or whatever. And that was because they were still working on the financials and the numbers behind the scenes. And apparently he wasn't happy at that current time. Later on, the UFC came out and said, this is nonsense. The fight is going ahead as scheduled. But that was after a potential negotiation occurred behind the scenes. Dustin was made happy, made whole with whatever he felt he deserved or wanted to earn, and then the fight went on as planned. So that was something that was a contract dispute that was pretty quickly rectified and then discussed and put out there, and the fight went on as planned. So that's a second place option, in my opinion, in terms of what's happening here, is that this is, at the end of the day, a contract negotiation, because we well know that the UFC will announce fights before the deals are finalized. And that's just something that they've done, whether you want to call it a great business tactic or something a bit underhanded. I don't really know. I don't know how the ins and outs of the business work, but I know that that's a common theme in a lot of these fight announcements. They announce the fights and then they go ahead and negotiate the contracts and finalize them. At least that's what I've heard through the grapevine. So if that is potentially still what's happening, and maybe there was a big contract dispute leading up to that presser, they weren't able to resolve it, and they decided to scrap the presser as a result. That's option one. The second option, I think, is the most likely scenario, and that's the one that people have been saying they've been hearing through the grapevine over and over for the last week, and that is an injury. Now, I heard Josh Thompson say that, and he's obviously in the know. He said that he heard that Conor McGregor is dealing with an injury, didn't want to go to the presser because he didn't want to give away whatever the injury was to Michael Chandler's camp. That very well may be true. And then if we think about the timeline and the narrative, then maybe they went back. Maybe they got an okay from one of the physicians and they were feeling confident, right? Ariel was saying, hey, we're feeling great positivity and optimism that the fight will happen. So perhaps they got a favorable opinion from a physician, and then maybe that changed. Maybe they continued to do rehab. Maybe they continued to work with other physicians, and the consensus changed, and why now there is so much pessimism, and why they're now putting out feelers for replacement fights, backup fighters, etc. Also, Jesse on Fire went on his channel earlier today and talked about the fact that he didn't want to discuss this theory that he had heard through one of his sources, but now he put it out there, which is that he had heard that Conor actually was suffering not from a leg injury, but from a head injury, and that he may not be cleared to fight until November, which is wild. That would be very, very disappointing if that is indeed the case. That's almost 5 months into the future. And, you know, if it is that, it is what it is. Fans and people still want to see him fight. And whenever he can come back, that would be amazing. But anyways, the point is these are the rumors that are swirling. And I think these are the most prevalent rumors that it is indeed an injury. Now, we made a video a couple of weeks ago saying that Conor McGregor seems to be injured from a lot of the stories that were coming out in the immediate future. And to me, this seems like the most likely outcome, the most likely scenario, that he is suffering from an injury. They're working with multiple physicians, and they're now coming to the consensus that this fight is probably not going to happen. And also, I can see the UFC potentially wanting to delay the fight only because, right, it's a weird situation. They always want fighters to fight when they've agreed to fight. But this is a potential exception, because if Conor does go in there, fights his schedule, and loses, I think that's actually going to be problematic from a financial standpoint. Not necessarily problematic, but it's a quite fall off from the pop that they could get, this final pop, this final round, this final run, if Conor McGregor instead were to win, beat Michael Chandler, and imagine go for a title fight against Islam, which is in the cards right now. So if he is seriously compromised, I could actually see the UFC almost wanting to push it in this rarest of rare situations. Now, I know that it would fly in the face of what the UFC normally wants. They want the fights to happen as scheduled, but this is Conor McGregor. This is something special. So I feel like if you read between the lines of what Ariel's saying, because he knows what's going on, he's even alluded to it. Well, maybe we'll play a little bit more of this clip, but he's alluded to the fact that he does know what's going on. And he did say certain people have read between the lines and figured out what's going on. So that means some of the theories that have been thrown out there have been true, whether it's a contract negotiation situation or an injury, but I believe it's the latter. I believe it is an injury. That seems to make sense with the uncertainty, the quote unquote optimism, now switching to pessimism. All of this makes sense. So let's just play a little bit more of this clip, and then we're going to talk about what we think could be a possibility for backup fights. I mean, there's just really nothing. Actually, Ariel talks about it a little bit here. Obviously, one of the things we've heard is Alex Pereira versus Yuri Prochazka, which seems far-fetched considering that Alex Pereira definitely suffered from 2 broken toes. So let's see what Ariel says.
I want to see it for all the fans who haven't experienced a Conor McGregor fight. A new fan base has been born over the last few years. They weren't even around for DP3. They weren't even around for that in July of 2021. There's nothing like a McGregor fight. There's nothing like that scene. June, July, International Fight Week. It's magic. It's the biggest gate in UFC history. And it was that, like, when tickets went on sale like this. So there ain't no part of me that is hoping that this falls through. But I'll tell you, as of right now, it's pessimism. They're searching for, they're reaching out, they're putting out feelers, they're making offers. This is where we stand. And it's in great limbo. And last week I told you, if you ask me right now, is this fight happening? I said yes. But what did I also say? This could all change tomorrow or the next day. You can never definitively say something is on, especially when there are things that come up in a training camp.
You see right there, that's the hint, right? Things that come up in a training camp that would not, why would you say a training camp versus the time leading up to the fight if it's a contract negotiation? He's talking about within the training camp, and that's probably due to sparring and training. It's got to be an injury. So we know that, like, another channel had made the point, well, I don't think it's an injury and it's probably contract negotiation, or we think it's he's flaking on the media obligations and they're penalizing him. That just is nonsense. There's no way that's the case. That's not a theory that holds water. And moreover, yeah, he's been posting footage. We have no idea where the footage is coming from, when it's coming from, whether it's from 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 2 weeks ago. We don't know. So I don't think that holds any credibility against the theory that he's suffering an injury. Things happen in a training camp, and Ariel knows what happens. This, to me, right here is a statement that shows without a doubt there's an injury. They thought they could get past it. They thought they could make it work. And I think now they're realizing that this is just simply not going to work. Maybe he went back into training camp, tried to continue to train, is encountering more problems, more headaches. If it is indeed a hand injury, I don't know. So that seems to me to be the most likely scenario, but let's keep listening.
And so I sit here as I continue to update, and I tell you it's a developing story all the time. I don't feel that same way anymore. I don't. I just don't. But I say that once again to tell you that tomorrow that could change. But as of right this second, I have to shoot straight, 1:15 Eastern time. I don't feel that way, and I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but them's the facts. It's not looking good. Because time is ticking. If this fight was in late July, this would be a totally different story. And so here's what's at play.
Well, that's interesting. Okay, so I didn't catch that the first time I listened to this interview. He said if it was in late July, again, the hints, it's too much. It's got to be an injury because that just means more recovery time. If you were saying late July, I mean, again, that could be, hey, more time to negotiate the contract if it is a contract dispute. But I think those are two hints that lead me to believe that this is indeed an injury. Maybe a head injury, maybe it's concussion protocol. Now, again, the rumor that we heard from Jesse on Fire was this November deadline, and maybe that was early on with just initial doctor reports, but this seems like a recovery issue. And maybe they don't push the fight that long. So that could be positive, but let's keep listening.
Play. They either can find someone on essentially 2.5 weeks notice to step in, either for McGregor or a whole new fight. You would like, in a perfect world, they can figure out, and I know they have their Perth date in August, and I know they have their Sphere date, and I know they have their Salt Lake City in late October. But, like, to me, if there's ever been a guy that deserves, the respect to call an audible for, it's McGregor. And what I mean by that is make a new date. Make a new date. I understand if Michael Chandler is in a position where he's like, I just need money. I don't think he's in that position. I know he will get a good chunk of cash if he fights McGregor from the UFC and from all the ancillary things that come into play when you fight Conor. There's a McGregor clause, so to speak. It's a lottery ticket. So I can understand him either saying, I'm going to wait. If you're going to tell me this is happening in August or September, October, okay, maybe I'll wait. If it's just done, then maybe I fight someone on short notice. I understand that. If I were in charge and this is done, you hopefully announce a 303 fight, a new fight, and at the same time you announce the McGregor fight. I think you could actually take a page from what Turki Al-Sheikh did after the Tyson Fury cut, which is Fury's out one day, next day you announce new date, May 18th, and then
Okay, so he's going on in terms of strategically what they should do and what are potentially options for Chandler as well. But I think the main thing we want to know here is what's really happening with McGregor. Who is he fighting next? When is he fighting? Is it still going to be Chandler? We want to see the return. So now putting all the pieces together, and we're also going to talk about potential backup fights. And I know we got some comments here, so let me take a look. Oh yeah, Western Mass Climber is asking, is Conor hurt? Sorry, I'm late. All good. This was an impromptu show. Nobody's saying it. But if you read between the lines of Ariel's interview, there are two things that stand out. One, he's saying, yes, if the fight were in July, this would be a different story, meaning the fight would likely happen. Okay, if it's a contract negotiation, why would you say that more time would be advantageous to this, whatever is happening behind the scenes? Why would that resolve just from more time? I think it's an injury. The second thing is he just mentioned, and I think he's leading us a little breadcrumb saying what he can without violating the trust of his sources. But he's saying that sometimes things happen in a training camp. That's not going to be related to contract negotiations, right? What happens in a training camp are injuries, sparring. You have hard training days. You can pull something. All different things can happen. You talk to Justin about this. There's just every fighter typically goes into a fight with some level of injury. So I think Conor maybe suffered something a bit more serious. Again, as I mentioned earlier, Jesse on Fire heard reports early on that it was a head injury, not a leg injury. So that might require concussion protocols, maybe multiple opinions to see when he's even available or ready to fight again, when he's healed up. And maybe the optimism last week that Ariel was talking about in terms of this fight going forward was because they got an opinion that was favorable. They put him back in there and he seemed to still look sharp. And then maybe as the days passed, he started getting, I'm just totally theorizing. He started getting headaches. He started having problems sparring. He started having problem with his vision. I don't know. I'm just making it up if it was indeed a head injury. So perhaps that's why we're now back at this point, back where it seems that they're putting feelers out for backup fights. And it does appear that this fight is indeed not happening. That's what I feel like. That's what I even felt like last week, that even though he was pushing this idea that they were feeling positive and excited that this would happen, I think it was not from a solid place and from a perspective where they actually were legitimately confident that the fight was happening, but they were just optimistic because maybe they had some good news from one of the physicians. They had some seemingly forward momentum, but they were still on thin ice. And now it seems like this is it. Western Mass Climber says the fight is starting to feel cursed like Khabib versus Tony. Let's not say that. Let's hope this still goes down. But okay, now we're in this position. We're going to see what happens. Ariel seems to be hinting at the fact that Conor could be ready by July. So maybe it's not a very serious injury, but it's one that maybe would not get cleared by the commission. Okay. Now we go back to UFC 303. That's International Fight Week. This is a huge date. So it's not like they can just scrap the event or make it be something mediocre. Plus, there's a clause in Las Vegas that if they change the main event, you are eligible for a full refund of that ticket. This is going to be a major problem, as this already went down as the highest gate in the history of the UFC, I believe, or maybe at T-Mobile Arena in particular. But this is a major problem. Also, all the pre-sales for UFC 303 via pay-per-view, I guarantee you those are going to likely get refunded. Maybe not. Maybe that's not true because the same laws don't apply for purchases made outside of Nevada, outside of Vegas. But whatever the case is, the UFC is going to be scrambling. Is there any fight that can replace this fight that is going to draw the same buzz? Obviously not. There's nothing. It's impossible. And especially the fact that it's short notice, it's already somewhat problematic because it puts a bad taste in your mouth about whatever fight is about to happen, especially if it's one where big stakes are on the line, because then they didn't have proper time to prepare. So you don't really know. And that's an issue. But what has been thrown out, one fight I heard was, again, Pereira versus Yuri Prochazka. That's one option. Again, we have to take into consideration that Alex Pereira is dealing with a broken toe. Maybe it's healed, maybe it's not, but seems unlikely to me that that's what's going to happen, but it's possible. There's also talks of Dricus du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya. Ariel addresses that as well, saying that Israel recently posted that he's getting back into training camp right now. So that also seems unlikely, especially if he's going to have to cut weight and this and that. I think they're planned to be on the Perth card in August. So I could see it. That would generate a lot of buzz. That would be an exciting fight. I just don't see it happening, especially if Izzy is trying to make a comeback and trying to reclaim the belt. I just don't see why he would do that and take that risk when, just to save this card. There's another fight that I've talked about that nobody else is talking about, and maybe for good reason, because it's probably just not possible. But I do think one replacement fight that would be super fun. And even if people aren't into it right away, I think after you see the media and the press unfold the weeks leading up, I think it could work. And I think it could be a pretty big buzz as a main event. And that would be Ian Garry versus Colby Covington. So I'm going to come back to this again. The reason why supposedly this fight is not happening, again, supposedly, I don't think it's necessarily the full reason, is that Colby is dealing with some injuries. He's dealing with a broken foot, allegedly, that he suffered early on in the fight against Leon Edwards. But, it's Colby. It's Colby. He does his thing. He puts on the act. Whether he wants to call it himself turning it up to 11 or whatever, but we know he kind of spins stories when he talks, and that's part of the fun. That's part of why we like to hear his interviews to some extent. So I don't really know if this is a legitimate injury or he simply didn't want to fight Ian Garry because he felt like statistically the matchup was too unfavorable for him. No problem with that. And I'm not calling it him a chicken or whatever for avoiding that fight. Sometimes you have to make these decisions, and I understand that. So if that's what his camp felt and that's what his team felt, that it was not the right fight, fine. But in this case, where this fight is falling apart, and we still have Ian Garry, by the way, another really popular Irish fighter, although a bit divisive, but very popular overall. If we could somehow postpone the Michael Venom Page fight or transfer him to another opponent, get Colby in there, that buzz from all the bad blood between the two of them, all the back and forth, the amazing, both of them are incredible on the mic. Whatever you want to say about Colby, yeah, it's an act, this and that, but he drums up people and he gets people excited. He gets people agitated. It's fun. I think this could be the one. I think this could do it. If they can somehow convince Colby, because I don't think it's the injury that's holding him back. I think he just doesn't want to take the fight. And again, more power to him. But if they can somehow get him to come back, that would, for this fight, I think that would be dope. Now, I've heard people saying this, what Pern is saying, don't mess with the Garry versus Venom Page fight. That's going to be a brilliant fight. I do think it's going to be an amazing fight. I think stylistically it's interesting. It could be a boring fight, by the way, too. Don't get me wrong. With that level of striking, could be back and forth. It could be a lot of waiting to counter and point fighting. So it may not be as dope as you think. But it is. But from the outside, just seeing that matchup and wondering how it's going to unfold, it is exciting. But I got to say, if we want something akin to a McGregor fight week, you slide Colby in. I guarantee you, if it happens, you're going to look back on this show and be like, oh, yeah, you were right. That was wild. The presser, the lead up. Colby's probably going to lose as well. And Ian Garry's going to look like a stud. And it would be a huge victory for him. He's a rising star. I mean, think about all that momentum, that excitement. That might propel him to a title shot next. We don't know if he wins in decisive fashion, which I think he would against Colby, who, whatever you want to say about him, he's been in the top 5, the top 3 for a very long time. He's a tremendously powerful fighter. Okay, wait. God, I hate you're right. That fight with Salvor, you agree with me? Yeah, I know. I think I'm pretty confident that even if people don't see it now, but I'm pretty confident that if they did do it, it would blow up. It would be crazy. Oh, Western Mass Climber, what is your idea? You said I like my idea more. What is that? Curious to know. Some other possibilities that I've heard: sliding Max Holloway in to fight Michael Chandler for the BMF belt. I mean, I'll see it. I'd love Max Holloway, and I like seeing Mike Chandler fight, and he would get an amazing fight, and that would be a big bump for him. And I think that's the one fight that he'd probably be open to, and letting the Conor fight go, at least in the short term. That's a possibility. I just don't know, though. I feel like that's not a very long turnaround for Max Holloway, and he's probably taken some time off. I would imagine he has, after that amazing performance and that brutal fight that he endured. So I don't think so. I don't see Ilya Topuria stepping in for a title fight against Max. I just don't know. I don't know what options are out there. And I just feel like if they can get Colby to come back somehow with enough money, and he's always staying fight ready, he's always in shape, I think that's the play. So it's right there. Wait, Western Mass Climber said, read my chat. It's right there. Did you say Habib? Oh, I see it. Here we go. The only way to fix it is to open Chandler. Sorry. is to open 165 for Chandler versus Oliveira. Tell the welterweight they either cut 5 or Charles versus, I don't know. I don't like that. I mean, it's okay. It's okay. I just don't like this. And then they're throwing together. The only way I feel like it'd be cool to have a 165 division if Conor's fighting. I don't know. To me, like that, it doesn't pique my interest that much. I think it's a fair suggestion, but I'm not, just being honest, I'm not crazy about it. Chime in if you feel differently. But that's where we stand. And yeah, it sucks because I was very excited for UFC 303. I was so pumped to see Conor's return. I think everybody was, even people who are hating on the fight and saying Conor's washed up and this and that, because we don't know. And I don't think he is. I think that's nonsense. He's still going to have that speed and timing to a large degree. And who knows, it may be even sharper than it was before after all the rehab and recovery and work he's done leading up to this fight. So it's a big disappointment. Let's pray that even if it's a 20% chance that the fight happens or whatever it may be, that somehow a miracle comes to fruition and the fight goes down. But if not, I hope the UFC is even contemplating or thinking about that as a possibility and that Colby might just be open to it. And if not, I guess we'll have to wait and see. Announcements will be coming probably in the next few days, according to Ariel Helwani. And that's that. All right, guys, that's a quick update. If you could like the video and if you're new to the channel, make sure to click that like button. If you want to see more from us, we just passed 300 subscribers, which is very exciting. Make sure to click subscribe, and we'll be back on Friday with another episode with my boy and my co-host, Justin James, the professional MMA fighter. If you haven't checked out his fights, definitely look him up on YouTube. You can see his fights in the UFC and other organizations as well. He's a pro, and I'm just a fan, but I love this sport. Last but not least, we'll end with a quick comment from Pern. He says, I just feel bad for Chandler. He has drawn the shortest straws 10 times if that fight falls through. And I, of course, would feel terrible for Michael Chandler as well. It's out of his control, you know, and I think in life we all have, I mean, I was just talking to my friend about this earlier today. There's certain things that we can't control, and we just got to ride the wave and deal with them as best we can. And that's it. But the good thing for Michael Chandler is if this fight does fall through, he's got a lot of options. People want to see him fight. He's exciting. He's a beast. He trains hard. He fights hard. So he's got a lot of things going for him. And while we can feel bad, I think it's not over. So let's see what happens. Maybe this fight gets pushed back to July or August, and we still see Chandler versus McGregor. But in the interim, in the short term, we got to see what happens with this fight, what happens with the replacement. And Conor, if you are injured, wish you a speedy recovery. We can't wait to see you come back, my man. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining for this impromptu episode. And we will see you on Friday for the weekly show. Thank you guys so much for joining. I'll see you next time. Take it easy.